Now, later this month, on November 21, Zimbabwe would mark 1 year after the fall of the regime of Robert Mugabe. His former Vice President Emmerson Mnangagwa's dismissal on November 6, 2017, triggered the crisis that led to his removal from office, has now since become the president of the country, having taken part in the election, in the first post-Mugabe era eletion.
Right, our colleague journalist Nyasha Mutizwa is joining us on this discussion from Zimbabwean capital.
Good morning, Nyasha. It's good to have you with us in the studio.
Yeah, it's a pleasure to be here.
Right, can you give us some details about what happened? Because you are Zimbabwean, days before Robert Mugabe's fall, and as well as your personal reactions.
Today marks the day that troops entered into Zimbabwe and drove tanks into the capital city, Harare. They patrolled the streets and took access to government buildings. And then in the early hours of the 15th of November, they took over the national broadcaster, the Zimbabwe Broadcasting Corporation, to insist that it was not a military takeover and that the president and his family were safe. So to answer the question about receiving information as journalists, well, I can say at the time, whether you're a civilian or a journalist, receiving information was through family and friends or through social media, simply because all the radio stations, newspapers, and our television outlet were under strict supervision. So people were sending and posting videos to say, don't go to this part of town because there are military tanks there, soldiers are patrolling, and we didn't know what it meant at that time. So some nights before, and that night as well, before retired Major General Sibusiso Moyo, who is now a minister, made his very memorable announcement that Robert Mugabe was under house arrest and what was happening was not a quote-unquote a coup. We heard shooting in certain suburbs in Harare, the capital. I myself and many Zimbabweans did not sleep well that night. It was a very strange thing for us because Zimbabwe is not known for violence or military unrest. In terms of what it meant as a journalist at that time, I can honestly say it was an uncertain place to be. At the station that I worked for at the time, we were put under high alert because, of course, the first thing that is done under a coup is to take over the media.
Were you scared at all that you were going to be...
Of course. Of course, it was a terrifying time because we didn't know what was happening. We didn't know what it meant because losing Robert Mugabe was just so unimaginable at the time.
Yasha, what would you say struck you the most, during this moment? What was the mood like, and what would you say struck you the most, thinking of an era, like a post-Mugabe era, just as you mentioned?
So it was exactly that, imagining an era where there is no Robert Mugabe, a Zimbabwe where Robert Mugabe is not head of state and government. In terms of the mood on the streets, it was a time when it felt like Zimbabweans had come together as a people. I remember specifically marching on the 18th of November, next to people of different colors and creeds, of course, and next to the soldiers themselves. And just imagine that. Where have you ever seen a coup where people are on the streets marching, singing, and taking pictures next to soldiers? There was an atmosphere of hope and expectation. We went parading on the streets, wearing our national flag, something that was completely unheard of at the time. And the fear that had kept so many people silent for years had finally been lifted, and the mantra was Mugabe must go, and it happened.
Right, it's 1 year now. Has anything changed comparatively, looking at the leadership of Robert Mugabe and that of Emmerson Mnangagwa?
So there's quite a difference in opinion. I mean, it's 1 year later and the euphoria has evaporated. Mnangagwa promised Zimbabwe a new dawn, but to many, the country still looks depressingly familiar, with long lines at the banks to withdraw small amounts of cash and shortages of basic goods, and that has led to rationing of things such as cooking oil. And President Mnangagwa started well, according to people on the ground, but his disputed election victory in July, followed by the military opening fire and shooting dead 6 civilians, and of course the recent cholera outbreak that killed more than 4,000 people, has caused people to question whether things have really changed. But of course, we have to give a balanced outlook of this, of course, Jerry. I mean, now there's things...
Positives, yeah, that's what
of course. Now there's things such as freedom of expression, which we didn't have in the post-Mugabe, in the former regime, in the Mugabe regime.
Yeah,
and of course that's something to point out, a positive to point out. We look at police roadblocks where motorists were routinely hassled for bribes, and that has now been eradicated as well. So there's a few positives we can look at. Some people are saying, interestingly enough, because there's no police on the ground, this has led to social decay. But of course, we wait to see what's going to happen with this. There are some positives that we do have to point out, but we still are questioning whether there is a big shift post-Mugabe, and whether we can really compare, when we compare the crocodile with Robert Mugabe, is there really a difference 1 year later?
And what about public spending? There have been cuts in the public spending too?
Yes.
The reduction of the cabinet from
Yes, the reduction of the cabinet is another positive one. It's gone from 35 to 20, and of course, this was a welcomed move to reduce fiscal expenditure, as well as the fact that there is a younger and more vibrant cabinet, and further moves to merge and privatize ailing parastatals can also help in trimming the excess fat in civil service. So we wait to see. Things such as the restructuring of government policy has been met with mixed feelings. So this is a journey to recovery, a long and painful one, but there are some rays of light that show that the process has begun to change. And clearly, this is effort that is being made under the Mnangagwa regime, a change to the things that we saw and we feared during Mugabe's time.
Merci Niasha.
Merci Niasha. I'd like to thank you very much for your comments and thoughts.
Ça ne fait qu'un an pour Emmerson Mnangagwa. Il a encore quelques années pour prouver qu'il peut vraiment changer le pays.
We'll continue watching. Thank you, Barbara. Thank you, Jerry.